Hi, I'm Summer Tothill, and every week on my Instagram I run a Q&A with my followers. They ask me their questions about how gender equality and oppression is affecting them in their world, and I answer. What you're about to watch or listen to is a compilation of 1 week's worth of those questions and answers. If you join me on Instagram every week, you can take part in the Q&A, ask your own questions, get your answers, get involved. Can you please elaborate on the male gaze? So I'll start by saying the male gaze traditionally refers to a phenomenon in media and entertainment, films, TV, books, art, but it has now, I think, spilled out a bit more into general culture and human behaviour. The male gaze is the way that women and women characters are depicted and the narratives that are created about women that are solely through the lens of the way that men see women, what men believe about women, and especially the way that men objectify women and project things onto women and women characters that are not necessarily present in those characters or in those individual people. The male gaze is the way that female characters in media for a long time have kind of acted like Sims without any true agency, who are really just a product of the imaginations of men who are kind of playing with us like Barbies to fulfill their fantasies, whether those fantasies be sexual or power fantasies or fantasies of them being good guys, and a fantasy where women are only really constructed to serve men's desires. So the long history of the male gaze as the lens through which women are viewed and also as the focus of how culture is expressed has not only shaped the way that men view women and the way that they objectify us and diminish us, but also it has shaped how women view ourselves and how we make assumptions about what we are and aren't capable of and what our basic nature is, based on the way that men with very little imagination and some very base desires and assumptions have decided women are. And actually, more than what women are, the male gaze has prescribed what women are for, which again is to serve the interests of men and the plots that men are going through and the character journeys that men are going on. The male gaze is why a guy who wouldn't be able to attract a super hot woman in real life can attract one in film and TV. The male gaze is why we associate the way that women look with the personality that we assume she has. The male gaze is responsible for so The male gaze was very effectively lampooned by Alison Bechdel in what is now known as the Bechdel test, where for any film or TV show, you apply this test where you go, okay, are there two female characters who have names? They have to have names, so they have to be real characters. Do they talk to each other? And if they do they talk about something other than a man? This test was meant to be a joke, but it is actually like seriously depressing how many films and TV shows fail this test, which shows that it is an effective joke that really reveals the way that the male gaze is failing depicting women in their full humanity, or indeed in roles that aren't really just there to enhance the men. And of course, the problem with the male gaze spilling out into culture is it becomes the way that men view women in real life and the way that women view themselves in real life and the way that we center ourselves around men. So how do we get around the male gaze in entertainment, and how do we get around it in our real life? Well, in film and TV and books and art, the solution is to have a lot more work created by women and about women. We need to hear women telling women's stories. We need for more of our cultural touch points to be women-centric and about real women. And in our real lives, we need to do what's called decentering men, a term coined by Charlie's Toolbox, which is where we remove men as the sole focus of our life and the gaining of a romantic relationship and building a life with men as our sole focus, and find a way to go within and live our full humanity without it being all about men. Do you support sex work? I have long been a vocal supporter of sex workers and their right to have a safe and respectful work environment, and to be able to do work that is protected by labour laws and entitlements that the rest of the working world gets. The problem is that is not generally the case. The sex work industry is multifaceted, and depending which part of the industry you work in and where you work, there are usually laws that criminalize some aspect of what you're doing as a sex worker that don't actually make it safer for you as the worker. They actually make it more unsafe. And now, if the goal of that is to discourage people from working in sex work, that's never going to work because there will always be a demand for sex work. Here are some examples of ways when paternalistic laws and systems have attempted to make sex work in some way safer or less stigmatized that have failed. The Nordic model, which has been uptaken in Scandinavian countries, is where the sex worker themselves and their activity is not criminalized, but purchasing sex work and essentially being a client of sex work is criminalized. The idea of this is to destigmatize the work that the sex worker does, but of course all it does is make the entire situation unsafe. In Queensland, Australia, where I live, sex workers are allowed to do their work, but essential aspects of their work that would help them to be safer are criminalised, like talking to other sex workers, sharing the same ride services, vetting each other's clients and letting them know which people are unsafe to work with. And because it's almost impossible not to break these laws, they are especially vulnerable to cops who are looking to target them. So sex workers in Queensland are not safe. In the US, the Sesta-Foster laws made it impossible for sex workers to advertise and communicate properly, which has resulted in the generalized stigmatization of talking about sex anywhere online in the US, which has been filtered out throughout the rest of the world over the last few years. And also it has resulted in sex workers being less safe. And let's not forget, sex workers come up against lots of dangers in their job, like rape, assault, and murder, and yet when this happens to them, police are much less likely to conduct proper investigations into what has happened because sex workers are viewed as less than human. And this is all why it is so important to see sex work as valid work, normal work, and work that is deserving of worker protections and respect. It needs to be just seen like any other everyday job. And it is a job that has a great deal of workplace health and safety concerns and risks, and so it needs to be respected and catered for because of those risks. I'm mostly talking about full service sex work, by the way, which we used to refer to as prostitution. It's basically performing sex acts in person for money with clients. Sex work also covers things like nude massages, phone sex lines, OnlyFans performers, and professionally paid porn actors. And some people would say being a sugar baby is also a form of sex work, and I would tend to agree. All of these are valid forms of work that are simply responding to supply and demand, but they all suffer from the fact that a system of stigmatization has resulted in laws that compromise sex workers' safety. They also suffer from existing in a misogynistic society that always puts women's needs and safety last. They also suffer from the stigma of anything regarding sex and our desire for sex and our absolute inability to just own up to the fact that wanting to have sex is a very normal thing. But they also suffer from a great deal of misinformation, and there are two supposedly feminist but not actually feminist arguments against sex work. One is that sex work can only ever be non-consensual, that sex workers don't really want to be doing it, and that many sex workers are actually trafficked into it. And the other is that sex work is inherently misogynistic and abusive and can only ever be an exploitative practice. There is a lot of terribly shit data out there about the supposed high prevalence of human trafficking for sex work. If you want to know more about this, I recommend listening to the You're Wrong About podcast episode about human trafficking, because the reality is most sex workers are not trafficked. And in fact, very few sex workers are what's called survival sex workers, which is where they wouldn't really like to be doing sex work, but they have no other option. Survival sex workers are very often queer and trans youth who have drug problems, who, if not for social stigmas against those things, would actually be able to get other kinds of paid work. So really, whose fault is it that they're doing that work? And the other argument against sex work is that sex workers can't possibly be doing it consensually, that it is inherently misogynistic and exploitative, which sounds like paternalistic bullshit to me, kind of the opposite of feminism, to imply that women in particular, because most sex workers are women, that women can't have the agency to decide to do this with their life and with their body. It also positions sex as something that is taken by men and plundered from women and not freely given, which again sounds like absolutely bullshit traditional patriarchal crap to me. And yes, sure, strands of sex work like the mainstream porn industry are deeply misogynistic and rely on a base level of exploitation and abuse, which is why we need greater worker protections and a more seriously protected and organized employment structure for that type of work. And ultimately, the mechanisms of misogyny at play in sex work are only going to reflect the base level of misogyny present in society. And again, whose fault is that? How can I break free from the narrative that I need to be married with kids? Firstly, I would say you can divorce the goal of having kids from the goal of being married. If you really, really, really want to have kids, you can have kids, and you can find ways to do that that are outside of marriage if that is an institution that isn't going to work for you. Marriage is, after all, an inherently oppressive patriarchal structure that was invented solely for the purpose of making women facilitate and serve men to be what they wanted to be. Attaching the concept of romantic love to the legal contract of marriage is actually one of the more genius tricks that the patriarchy has pulled. Originally, you didn't need the promise of romance to lure women into marriage. They didn't really have a choice. Historical laws of coverture meant that women couldn't own money or own property. In order to have any kind of station or protection in life, or even somewhere to live, you had to be married to a man. Of course, when women start to gain the legal right to own money, get jobs, live on their own, marriage starts to look a little bit less attractive. So what have you got to do then? You've got to make marriage look more appealing, connect it to the idea of romance. Romantic love is the thing that you need, women. And there's nothing wrong with wanting romantic love. I am in romantic love. If that's what you want, then have it. And if kids are what you want, then do that too. And if you don't want those things, then don't do it. And if you don't want them right now, then don't do them right now. You can find ways to do them in the way that feels the most liberated and happy for you. That's it for this Q&A. Thank you so much for listening. Do you love exclusive content that's just for you and to sticky beak inside other people's lives? If so, please consider subscribing to my Instagram. Your subscription to my Instagram is less than $5 a month, and that gets you guaranteed answers in the weekly Q&A, which is absolutely not the case for non-subscribers. It also gets you subscriber-only content and a peek inside my life. I do not share on my public Instagram really anything about my personal life, but subscribers get a peek under the hood how I live, laugh, lol in a feminist way. But personally, my favorite thing is the guaranteed answers in the Q&As. I love being able to tell my subscribers that any question they ask me every week will absolutely get answered. So go to my Instagram and hit the subscribe button. Find me on Instagram at summertothill, that's summer with an O, spelt the same way as you see in this YouTube channel. I can't wait to see you there.